Hi.
Hey everyone.
And welcome. It's we're back on Thursday. Here
Yep,
we are.
already.
Here I am giving you the day again. So it's our live for the week, and the title is How Do You Know What You Know? Interesting title. And the reason why is because we wanted to talk about where a lot of our foundational beliefs come from and a lot of our stories come from, which guide us through our life, don't they?
They do.
Yeah.
And often a lot of the time we're kind of unconscious to all that stuff. We just sort of live our life, go about our day, and generally we just react to our day coming at us type thing. We see it we're kind of victim of circumstance most of the time, or at best we're kind of just the day's unfolding and we're reacting in the best way we can with what we've got. Yeah,
and I don't know if you've noticed, but sometimes something will happen and you see that what happened completely different to the person next to you or your spouse or your work colleague or whatever. It's like, oh, such and such and such and such, which means X, Y, Z. And your work colleague looks at you like, really? Oh, I didn't see it that way. It's a whole different thing. And even though the two of you saw exactly the same interaction or the exact same situation, you've both got different perspectives about that. And not that all usually causes some sort of conflict, because we're sort of used to the fact that people have a different idea about what went on, but sometimes it leaves us a little bit confused as to how did we come to two different conclusions with that one situation, which was clearly this way.
Yeah. To you, it was simple. It's black and white, mate. You're just wrong, because we both saw it, but there's the right and the wrong. And it boils down to your perspective versus their perspective of the same event. And the interesting thing is that the perspectives can vary, and often will do, and our perspective will shape our experience. So, based on how we see what's just taken place, that's been our personal experience, which has differed to the person next to us, their experience, same event. Yeah,
which is really interesting, because perspective is sort of like the end result of all of the processes that get you to that point as well. Because underlying that, before we form a perspective about something, we actually have this underlying defining going on. We're defining the situation, we're defining the people involved in it, or we're defining where we are. It could be anything, time of day, there's all sorts of things, and we create all these definitions which then filter through to our perspective of what actually happened. And then, of course, how you're perceiving all those things and how the next person next to you perceives all those things, completely different. So there's our first problem, where our perception, our idea of what's going on can be completely different to the next person. And did you have something you wanted to say about that?
No, that's fabulous.
Cool. And then behind that, how we do our defining is actually all coming from our beliefs and stories that we formed when we were young. So if you've watched some of our earlier videos, you would have watched us talk about the 12 fundamental beliefs. We've touched on that a couple of times, and we go into it in great depth in our programs. But those 12 foundational beliefs are formed between 0 and 7, so it's a pretty early window, and it's a bit scary to think you're getting a lot of your background information from your at max 7-year-old self. It's probably not the best. You wouldn't ask your 7-year-old self about how you should handle different things in your life, but that's what we refer back to, a lot of those foundational beliefs. And then we've got these in-ground thoughts and feelings around how things show up in our lives, as we've created these stories to orientate ourselves into the world. Because for our survival, it's essential we know how things work, how things go together, and we've created this whole scenario that we base our life on.
And it is interesting because it comes from such a young age, and it's a bit hard to swallow. You sort of think, come on, I'm an adult now. Yes, I had a few stories back then, and that's right. It's not. My stories are different, but what actually happens is it's the same story, but you've adapted it unconsciously over the years as you get older and move, out of adolescence into adulthood, and the story adapts to a more age-appropriate version of the same old story from back when you were 0 to the age of 7 sort of thing, essentially.
Absolutely. So often when we're coaching, we'll actually take people back as far as they can remember. Now, sometimes that version of the story may be in their teenage years. Some people are able to go back a little bit further, and if we can get somewhere in the 0 to 7, then that's a very powerful place to be working with people and their different perceptions and go from there. But they're so it's fascinating because we have that belief that we've formed, and then we keep finding references in our life where we prove it to be true. Whereas the person next to you had a different fundamental belief coming on, and they have many, many references as to why their way of seeing the world is true. So way back when we're young, we've got this whole foundational difference between where our starting point is. And you know that if you start heading directly east and someone goes 1 degree off where you go and you keep walking in the same direction for, let's say, a year, if you walked in that one direction for a year, that person that was 1 degree off your path is going to be a very long way away from you. So it doesn't even have to be a very big shift in the thinking. It's just a slight shift, a different foundational belief that's being formed, and then we have these references, these stories, these experiences, which of course we believe to be true. And that creates our outcomes when we get to wherever we are in our life right now.
And those stories, they do form our reality. They, as Linda's saying, they have our reticular activating system, or our RAS, which is part of the brain that when you have something in your mind or you're going for something, it will attract your attention to things in the world that match that sort of that focus. And so as your RAS is picking up things, it's picking up things in relation to your stories, which are kind of like your filters that you see the world through. And so that's reinforcing to you that those stories are true, because I've got so much evidence. I mean, it's true because I saw it. It's happening. You know, that's reality.
Yep.
But it's looking only for those things. So while your RAS is looking for those things and presenting you with that evidence to say that your stories and your filters that you've come up with at that young age are true, other RASs of other people are doing the same thing. And it's interesting because as they do it, they're coming up with a story that's equally as true to them, and it's completely different to your story.
I often wonder how we ever survive. We probably want to run around and club each other on the head all the time. Yeah. Your story's wrong, my story's right.
Yeah.
That's not how it is. But we can see how those conflicts can come up.
Yeah, and so the point of tonight's short sort of chat was, it's about, we want to sort of raise some awareness there for you on these stories, on these filters that we run unconsciously, just to become a bit more conscious about, okay, so because there's a couple of things. One is that the stories are very unreliable as far as being true. We
make it up.
We make it
all up.
And we make it up at that super young age. So it's like, whoa, you're an adult now. So now you can really, with some conscious awareness around these things, you can start to change the story. You can start to choose consciously, how do I want to see things? How do I want my world to be?
Yeah.
What do I want to create now?
You get to choose a different made-up story that probably is more empowering than the one that you formed when you were 4.
Yeah, one that serves you. The reason you formed those stories when you were at a young age was because you were vulnerable. You needed the stories to keep you safe. You're an adult now, and so you've learnt a lot since then. Between there and here, you've become resourceful. You've got huge capacity in the world to create what you'd love. So what you can do now is start to transform the stories into stories that actually serve you here now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember being a little kid, and getting into trouble, and I remember feeling like I was in the bad books for such a long time. It was like, could have been, I don't know, it felt like weeks. Just never get back on mum's good side or dad's good side or whatever, because I really messed up. And then when I've had the other experience of being the parent and telling a child off, it's really just in that moment. It's like, yeah, okay, this was not the right thing to do. Let me tell you off. And they probably had a similar experience to me. They carried that around for weeks and weeks and weeks, thinking they're in the bad books. But as the parent, you start to realize that it's just moment by moment corrections and, trying to deal with the frustration or whatever that's going on. But again, those sorts of things formed the stories that then shaped my perspective of that sort of scenario.
And they're important. It's super important to have these stories and to form them young as we do. It's a natural process, and what it does is it gives us orientation in the world. So we form our values, and we live out our values. We avoid what we perceive was missing when we were young, and we go for what our values are, what's important to us that we formed when we were young as well.
Yeah.
So it's the orientation. The point is that when you move into adulthood, it's time to upgrade.
Time to just observe as you're walking around and you start to run the story in a situation. You go, oh, I can watch myself doing that, and hang on a minute, maybe I should question it a little bit. Maybe I should just maybe re-examine my perspective of what's actually going on, and either decide it's true in relation to what I know, or choose a different one, make up something new, so that then you can move forward in an empowered way. Or the people around you, maybe it's your kids or the people you work with, you might want to have a more empowering outcome for them as well.
Yeah, so you can, you might have noticed by now that in life you're having reoccurring pattern-like sort of cycle things happen, whether it's your reaction or response to events that take place, or it's actually the events, the experiences that you're having seem to keep happening over and over.
Same old arguments with the same old people, or same argument with a few different people, just for variety.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's those stories playing out, and they'll continue to play out until you learn what they're trying to show you. And so what you can do is, in that situation, you're probably familiar with it. So you could say, all right, I know that generally I get pretty angry at this point in time, whether it's driving in traffic and someone cuts you off or whatever it might be. So my go-to is just to hit the horn or to do whatever I do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try something different right now, because I'm going to try out what these guys are talking about. It seems to make a bit of sense. Yeah. And the moment you choose to be curious about it, it puts you into the position of the observer of the event. So no longer are you buying into the illusion of the bullshit story that you've been carrying for 40, 50 years, or less or more. And so as the observer, you create space in that moment. And when you create space, you allow yourself to tap into some inner resources and other options that you don't otherwise have. If
like
you
your
just,
intuition, for example.
Exactly right.
You cut that off when you're highly emotive and in your head.
Yep. So if you're just reacting, you'll know it's always you're running your old stories, and they're unreliable. They're from kiddie time.
You made it up. You made all of it up.
Yeah. So you can make up other ones, and to make up other ones too. So just sit in the stillness. Just go, well, this is not getting me anywhere. I'm still pissed off at this person, and they've got away with it because I didn't toot the horn or whatever. All right, so it's never about them or what's happening outside of you anyway. It's always what's happening inside of you. That's the important thing, and that's what's really going to create the cool things in your world. So. So as we change the way we think, to change the way what we're telling ourselves is true, we'll start to see our world reflect back to us. Those changes, those inner changes, start to reflect back externally to us. And
perhaps people stop cutting you off in the traffic.
Yeah, exactly right, because you don't need that to happen anymore. You've got it. Okay, I don't. That's not something I need to react to anymore. I'm okay. Find the middle point. And so I was going to say, with that as well, you can sort of say to yourself, while you're sitting there as the observer in that moment, rather than scratching your head and thinking everybody got one over on you or whatever.
Yeah, I got ripped off.
Yeah, sit there and say to yourself, well, how else could I see this situation in a way that serves me and that person?
Absolutely.
Just be curious. How else could you see it? Because you're only seeing it one way. If you're on autopilot, you're seeing it one way, and it's an unconscious way. Generally speaking, we don't think about these things, we just react.
Yeah.
So if you take the time, take a moment, how else could I see this? It's bloody intriguing at the very least, because there's another way to see it. Find another way that actually serves you and then proceed.
Yep.
And keep doing that, you know, find other ways and other times you can do it. You will start to see some crazy shifts start to take place in your day. It's a really good practice.
Absolutely. And curiosity, I love that word. It's one of my favorite words in the whole world, because it seems to have no perceived negative opposite. It's just open. There's no fear. It's such an amazing word. So being curious and being open and just watching, it's fascinating. I was doing with that car cutting off thing. I always in my head had this vision of some asshole who was aggressive and blah blah blah, and you know, got one over on me, and you know, probably does it to other people as well. What an asshole! And then I started thinking, well, what if it's someone who was just like having a bad day and didn't quite check their mirror? I mean, I've done that before. Have you?
What happens? It reminds me of a story. Quick story on that.
Quick story.
I'm going around the roundabout. This guy just comes out, like he sees me, I'm sure of it, comes straight out onto the roundabout, literally cuts me off, so much so that I have to swerve to avoid him and drive up his side of the road. So the wrong side of the road I end up on, just to try and avoid him. I pull in and park, and I'm like, what? And he parks as well and comes back. And I'm thinking, there's going to be something go down here. And, you know, he's obviously clearly angry at me. I've done something wrong or whatever, but it seemed like it was his fault, and all these stories are going on in my head. The first thing he says to me, he's got tears in his eyes. He says to me, mate, I am so sorry. I've just come from my dad's funeral, and I guess I'm way more shaken up than I thought I was. Please accept my apology, sort of thing. And I just went, like, my head exploded, because I thought, that's not what I was thinking it was going to be. So
yeah, absolutely.
We just don't know. We don't know the story, and the story really doesn't matter. Again, it's not about them, it's about us.
And once we set a belief, we've got such a life based on assumptions, but we set them in concrete, and that's where it becomes a place of potential suffering, a potential thing that's going to hold you back from what you really love. So be aware this week, and if you have any amazing insights, pop them in the comments. I'm sure other people would love to learn from your experiences as well.
Yeah,
cool,
awesome.
So other than that, jump on our website, uauretreats.com. We got it right?
And
yeah,
sorry, keep going.
And our upcoming retreat in October will be absolutely mind-blowing. The format has been refined even more. We're very excited to be launching that. It'll be the 14th to the 17th of October here on the Gold Coast hinterland. Beautiful environment. You'll think like you're in the middle of nowhere, but you're not. And incredible food and people and interactions, and a really good way to sharpen the saw and get your focus where you want it to be, so you can create what you love. Yeah,
we'll dive deep. It's an immersion, so we're going to help you to really seriously rattle loose your old stories, your foundational beliefs, what's true, absolutely true. We're going to help you to fragment that and sort of get it floating a little bit, so that you can bed in place what it is you can see is true now, in order to really create what you'd love in your life. So it's an incredible experience. If you're thinking about doing it, check out the website, email us, get some more information.
And if you don't believe us, check the testimonials video on the website, because that was from our first group of grads that went through, and they are doing mind-blowingly amazing.
It's
really,
beautiful.
Really happy to announce how well they're doing. So anyway, have a great night, and we will catch you next week.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, guys.
See ya.
Bye.